So there you go. All right, so I'm going to jump in real quick because we've got a lot to cover and not a lot of time. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. If you are brand new to WQX, this is kind of for you. If you are not brand new to WQX, you're going to be bored a little bit here at the first, so I apologize for that. But I think you'll still get something great out of it. Am I coming through on the webinar? Good.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So first of all, training outline, what we're going to be covering today. Broken up into two halves. So the first half is really an overview of WQX and WQX Web. This is all about how do you get the data in and publishing your data to the water quality portal. So we'll talk about what is WQX, the WQX schema. We'll give a very brief overview of WQX Web. And then you also get the chance to do some hands-on training. So you're going to get a chance to upload some of your own data. This is why we did have to limit it to 30 people, because we only have room for, we only have 30 accounts, 30 training accounts. So for those 30 that are registered, you'll get a chance to play around with it a little bit. And then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the water quality portal. So we're going to talk about how WQX interacts with the water quality portal. You're going to learn how to download data from the portal. Just out of curiosity, how many people have downloaded data from the portal in here? Okay, most of you. Okay, so you'll be in pretty good shape. It's honestly not that difficult. Then we're going to really get to geek out. Laura promised me and Jim that we are going to get to geek out a little bit. So we're going to get to geek out a little bit on web services. So we're going to introduce you to this idea of a web service and show you some of the cool things that you can do with web services. The water quality portal is all built upon this concept. You don't need to know what they are right now. We'll explain all that, what that is. And then if there's time, we'll show how that all comes together with something called How's My Waterway. Can you guys see the screen okay? Do we need to try to turn the light off? Maybe?
There's a couple.
Turn the spots off.
Yeah, just the spots. See what that does. No.
Yes.
Doesn't do anything.
There's like an ABC.
Oh, that did something. It's almost there.
Perimeter.
There you go. That works.
That'll work.
That work?
Yeah.
Okay, that's better. Okay, some documentation. If you're able to see these links up here, all of this information that you're going to see today is available at these links. So you can get access to everything that we have here, including the portal. The training user ID and password, we'll share that with you guys, or we actually already have up here front. And then also how to get to WQX and everything else. Some of the web services documents that we're going to share, those are things that aren't available generally on the web. Most everything else here is generally available on the internet. That bottom right-hand corner one is not. We've posted that up to a Google Drive. There's some presentations as well as some other documents that you can play around with there at that URL. Okay, this is the monitoring conference, and the water quality portal is certainly a key tool or product of the National Water Quality Monitoring Council. As such, there are a ton of opportunities for you to go to other things relevant to the water quality portal. First of all, really want to highlight this, and we are actively recruiting people to do this. We are trying to do a video. People giving testimonials about the water quality portal. So if you've had a good experience with the portal or something that you've been able to do that's unique, come find either myself or Laura or Candace. Candace, raise your hand. And we will record you. There's a room set aside to record, and through some magic, which I'm not sure how we're going to pull this off yet, but we're going to put this together in a video by Thursday. So at the closing plenary session, there will be a video with your happy faces on it. It's a great opportunity for us really to highlight the portal. So if there's something that you've seen there that you really like in the portal that you'd like to share, that you'd like everybody else to share, that'd be great. It also will be posted to YouTube later as well, right? Yeah, so you'll be permanently famous. All right, there's also a networking session Tuesday for sharing data for biological assessments. So we've been talking about WQX 3.0 for a little while. We're starting to make some progress on that. So it's an opportunity to come and chat with us about biological data and how biological data should be modeled, what works in WQX, what doesn't work, what we should do differently. So it's an opportunity to have that discussion as part of the networking session. There are also several sessions as well. There's a session on Wednesday about steps to increase interagency coordination on water quality monitoring and data sharing. On Thursday, there's a session about using the water quality portal for regional and national water quality studies. And then there's also some booth demos as well. So tomorrow, right after the opening plenary, there's a booth demonstration on the water quality portal as well as How's My Waterway. And then on Wednesday at the EPA booth, there is a session on publishing sensor data. So we're not going to talk at all about sensor data today, but there's lots of discussion during the conference about sensor data. And if you want to see some of the new stuff that we've developed about publishing sensor data, come to the booth on Wednesday. Okay, animations.
That was intentional. And make sure you talked about it.
All right. Yeah, that didn't come across very well there. So this, you've probably seen, if you've ever seen us give a presentation, you have seen this slide. So this talks about the basic process for publishing data to the water quality portal. And you'll notice that as we talk about it, we used to talk about you submit data to EPA, or you submit data to WQX, or you submit data to Storette. I actually tried to get our team to stop talking about it that way, because I don't want us to think about it that way. I really would rather have you think about it that we're publishing data to the water quality portal. And WQX is just the means for doing that. WQX is the means for publishing data to the water quality portal. So the way this whole process works, there are two methods for publishing data to the portal. You can publish it through WQX directly. That's really meant for if you've got your own data system, you've got your own database, you've got some IT people that can do some programming for you. You can set up an automated approach for publishing data to the water quality portal. You can say, do this monthly, push the data out there. It'll take care of it all for you. You'll get reports back telling you how you did. The other option, which is what you're going to be trained on today, which doesn't mean you have to go that option, but it really is just to help you understand the process, is using a web interface. And what this web interface does, WQX Web, is really meant for those users that have spreadsheets or maybe don't have access to IT people to build your stuff. And it allows you to be able to take those spreadsheets, teach WQX Web what your spreadsheet looks like, and then you can publish it up through WQX Web, and it takes care of everything for you and sends it to the portal for you as well. The portal has actually been just an awesome development in terms of our collaboration between USGS and EPA and actually all the states as well, in that it allows for this one-stop spot for all of the USGS data, all the EPA data, and then all of the state, tribal, volunteer group, everybody who's publishing data through WQX. It's all available in one spot using common language, common interface. It's incredibly beneficial. It's one of those things that we have wanted to have for decades. It really came about in about 2012, and so it's been around for almost 7 years, and it continues to improve. All right, so I'm going to geek out for just a minute, but I won't take too long on this. One of the critical concepts that makes WQX work is this concept of XML. When we used to talk about this back in 2008, when we did the training at the monitoring conference then, XML was totally new to people. Nobody really understood it. They didn't know what it was, and so we would have to spend a bit of time on this. XML really, for your purposes, it's really just a standard format for publishing the data. We've defined what are the data elements, what are the columns, so to speak, what order do those columns need to go in, which ones are required, which ones are not required, and the XML schema just defines what those columns are so that I can communicate, you can communicate, we can all communicate in the same way, and it becomes this defined method for communicating. The WQX XML schema has been around for a long time. It's been around for 12 years at this point. It's really only had one major change, and that was from version 1 to version 2, and that was with the incorporation of the biological and habitat schema. And it really, to me, is a testimony of how well it has worked, that we are just now starting to talk about WQX 3.0, which is really taking another look at the biological schema. So this has been a significant improvement over how we have published data in the past. How many of you were around in the old Storette days? I know there's a couple. Okay, so yeah. So I was there too, and it was difficult from the EPA side because we were constantly having to chase technology. We were constantly having to chase the latest version of Oracle. We were constantly having to chase the latest version of various software. We couldn't keep up with it. And so we were having, and Storette, as soon as we would release a version of Storette, it suddenly wouldn't work on people's computers because Oracle was on a different version. And so WQX has been phenomenal from that perspective in that we have not had to really release new components in those 12 years that it's been out there, which is phenomenal. Right, WQX Web was really designed to allow users to more easily share data with EPA. All right, I have a trivia question to see if anybody knows this. Does anybody know what WQX Web was originally named? I don't even know if Laura knows this.
I don't know that.
Anybody know what it was originally before it got this great name of WQX Web? It was horrible, and I can tell you who named it. It was me. That's why I know it so bad. It was called the XML Generation Tool. Isn't that an awesome name? Don't you like WQX Web so much better? Yeah. This is why they don't let me name things anymore. So WQX Web is this great way of being able to publish data. It's meant to be, it's designed to work with Excel. So it really is designed for those users that are managing data in Excel. Excel is okay for managing your data. I will say, because if Angie from Penobscot were here, she would say, don't tell them that Excel is a horrible way to manage your data. It is a horrible way to manage your data. But WQX Web is a great way to be able to get your data, and Excel is kind of that intermediary. It doesn't have to be Excel, it could be CSV files, but it's looking for that flat file format to be able to get the data in. It's really good for small data partners. It's really designed for that. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a perfect WQX format. You don't have to match the template. So we're going to be training you guys on the WQX templates. Those are meant to get you started. It doesn't have to be in that template format. You can teach WQX Web to use whatever format you have. It gets a little bit more complicated that way, but you can really do whatever you want. All right, so some of the things that we're thinking about right now is WQX 3.0. Some of the highlights from our current thinking is some lengthening of fields. Those are pretty minor. It's really just making some of the fields longer, as we've learned over the past few years that people will come up with new things they want to share that we didn't think of. And so we need to make a field longer as a result of that. One of the big changes that we're looking at is around data quality. So a lot of you may have participated in some of our discussions over the past several years, most of them being led by Laura, about trying to get better documentation in WQX, so that getting people to share more consistent metadata so that other people can make more use of that data, particularly nutrients data. Metals data is another one that was looked at in particular. So we're looking at really trying to implement some of those recommendations that come out of those reports. And then in addition, this is something that I'm very excited about, we're looking at adding a new service to WQX that's a QA/QC service. And basically what it'll allow you to do is you could take a file that's in WQX format, you can bounce it off to this service, and you'll get back a QA/QC report. The neat thing about this new service as we implement it, that it's not going to be inside WQX. So why does that matter? Why that matters is that you don't actually have to submit your data to WQX to get back this QA/QC report. So what that means is that if you are downloading data from the portal and you want to run it against our QA/QC process, you can just bounce that file directly against our QA/QC process and get a QA/QC report, even though it's not your data. So this is going to be super handy, and you can also check your data before you submit it to us. You can just bounce it against the service and get back a report. And then you'll get back this report anyway when you do a submission. So that's something that's coming. And then also we're looking at some fairly big changes to the biological schema. Mostly we're trying to simplify it. The biological schema inherited its life from Storette. It was very much designed after the Storette model for biological data. We've learned a lot since then, and I think we can make it a lot simpler. So we're taking a look at that. If you're interested in that kind of data or have some ideas, come to that networking session and chat with us some more about it. All right, any questions so far? Everybody still good? Arnie, I don't know if I'm going to let you ask a question, but go ahead.
What are the QA/QC examples? What types?
Yeah, so we've had some initial discussions about that so far, very preliminary. Yeah, that would be great. So we're looking at location. That's the one we've had probably the most discussion about. We're also looking at potential data ranges, unit combinations, parameter unit combinations, those types of things. That's probably about as far as we've gotten at this point. Maybe methods, parameter combinations as well. That's mostly what we're thinking about so far. The thing that we're not quite sure if we're going to be able to do yet, but we really want to be able to do, we want it to be able to look at your existing data. So if you've already submitted data, that it would compare and say, oh, you've got something that's way outside of your normal range for this particular parameter. I don't know if that's doable, but that's something that we're looking into. All right.
Dwayne, a question online says, when is WQX 3.0 expected to launch?
Yeah, so our original target was this December. The challenge with the shutdown, that totally blew up our schedule. So I don't know if I can give a certain date yet, but it's within the next 12 months, I would say. Okay, let me walk through some of the data model that we have within WQX to help you kind of understand a little bit better about how information is organized. You will get firsthand experience with this as you dive through the exercises today. First idea is a project. The project is why you're out there collecting data. What you are going to see here on the bottom is the template that we will use for those particular types of data. Like I said, projects answer the question, why were you out there sampling? For what purpose were you sampling? Doesn't need to be super specific. It really is just to help you organize your data and to help somebody else understand your data. It's a great place to put your QAP. That's one of the things that we strongly recommend, is that your QAP gets stored at the project level. Data can be associated with more than one project as well. So if you're collecting data for multiple purposes, that's okay. Upload those multiple projects. It totally supports it. Next concept is this idea of a monitoring location. Monitoring location is where. It's where you're collecting your samples. Monitoring locations are fairly simple. They have a unique identifier. You will see this is common through all of these major concepts. There's always unique identifiers for everything. There's a unique identifier for projects. There's a unique identifier for monitoring locations, and so on. They also have a name. I would recommend they be good names. They be names that are meaningful. We look at a lot of data in the portal, and we see lots of names like TR1 and VR7. Not helpful. And so think about, as you're putting names in, how would you want somebody else to be able to discover the data that you're publishing? The name is really critical. Jim has added some really great functionality to the portal over the past couple of years that allows people to be able to discover our data via Google, and guess what it's keying off of? That station name. And so it's really important that you put a meaningful station name if you can. Type is important as well. Good latitude, longitude coordinates. I can't stress that enough either. Everything keys off of that latitude, longitude coordinate. People do a pretty good job with this. We do see a number of monitoring locations in Kazakhstan. That's an easy mistake. You just forgot to put the negative sign. We do a lot of monitoring in Kazakhstan, I'll tell you. And I've also noticed a fair bit of monitoring off the coast of Africa at the 00 latitude, longitude coordinate. So that's another one to watch for. Our QA/QC services will certainly help pick up some of those as well. The bread and butter within WQX is this idea of activities and results. Activity is a term that was really invented by Storat and WQX. It doesn't really have a meaning. The closest analogy would be a sample, but it's not just a sample. It could be a measurement that you're taking out in the field. It could be a biological assessment. It could be a habitat assessment. It's some unique activity that you're doing out in the field, or it could be a bottle that you're sending off to a lab. The thing that is really critical about an activity is that you're using one common collection method to collect that sample. So you can't have 3 different collection methods for an activity. There's always one particular collection method. Activities also have unique IDs. That's the last level where there is a unique identifier. The templates that we use, and actually WQX Web can help with this, it can help generate an activity ID. This is one of the things we have found over the years that people generally don't have is an activity ID. This is something that they typically have to generate. I would recommend you keep track of them though, because if you ever need to update your data or replace data, it's always by this activity ID that you're going to be able to do that. So it's a really critical piece of information. And then you'll see all kinds of other information down at this level. When were you out there, the time, what was the result, how did you collect it, how did you analyze this. All of this critical metadata is there in order to properly describe the data. All right, and with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to you next.
WQX Web overview.
Oh, overview, thank you. So I'm going to do a quick overview of WQX Web just to introduce you to that idea. So WQX Web sits within the Central Data Exchange. Central Data Exchange is just an EPA environment that allows for all kinds of different data to be shared with EPA. We've put WQX in there just for ease of use. Oh, of course I can't type my password correctly. Okay. So when you log into CDX, if you have more data flows than this, then you'll see everything that you own. I'm going to click on WQX Web, and you're going to see the very basic interface for WQX Web. WQX Web is all about defining what it calls an import configuration. Import configuration, the best way to think about it is a map between your data or your template of data and WQX, the WQX data model. So for example, if you've got a spreadsheet, and in column 1 is your monitoring location identifier, and in column 2 is your monitoring location name, and in column 3 is the latitude, and in column 4 is the longitude. WQX Web allows you to define what it calls an import configuration to tell WQX to say, okay, you're going to upload a file, and I'm going to look in column 1 for the ID, I'm going to look in column 2 for the name, I'm going to look in column 3 for the latitude, column 4 for the longitude. This is where all the power comes in with WQX Web. You can define your import configurations however you want. We have templates, so there's templates that you guys are going to be working on that are predefined to match the Excel spreadsheet that you work on. It's a great place to start, but then as you modify or expand your capability, you can add additional capability as well. All of that capability is under this setup and import configurations, and I'll just introduce you a little bit to how this works. So you'll get an entire list of import configurations. The other thing that's nice about import configurations, if you ever get stuck, just call our team. We actually can see your import configurations and we can help you. We can actually design import configurations for you as well. We do that all the time. And we can share things out with you, and if you get stuck or are trying to do something special, we can do that as well. So I'm going to just show you just one example. We'll stick with monitoring locations. Okay, so within here, as with all this information, there's different file types. So this particular import configuration that I'm using is a text with a tab delimited. And then down here are all of the different data elements that are described within WQX for monitoring locations. And so what I'm able to do is I'm able to order these in the order that I have in my file. And you can use these column letters to be able to organize your spreadsheet. So again, imagine your spreadsheet. You know, in Excel, you've got column A, B, C, D, E. This works exactly the same way. So if I know that my HUC8 field is actually in my H column, I just do that and it reorders it. So I just switch it to H and it'll reorder it and put it in that column. And then when I upload my data, it's going to look in that column H for my HUC column. Other things that you can do, you can also combine. If I have maybe, let's say I had one column that had multiple things in it. First, one we see all the time is maybe you've got a column for dissolved oxygen. People do that all the time. WQX can handle that. What it basically does is you say this column is my dissolved oxygen value, and it's going to be the units or milligrams per liter, and then you can say in the method that I use for this is whatever your method is. So it can totally handle that. That's a little bit more complicated. You probably won't be doing that today, but it can handle that sort of thing. The other big thing that WQX Web can do is that it can also translate your data as well. So let's say in your data, we'll stick with dissolved oxygen, you call it DO. That's what you call it. WQX will reject that because it says we don't recognize that value. That's not a WQX value. But what you can tell WQX Web to do is you can say every time you see DO, replace it with dissolved oxygen. And it'll do that for you on the fly. You don't have to change your data. WQX will take care of it for you on the submission, and it allows you just to keep moving. And if you add something new that WQX doesn't recognize, it'll flag that, and they'll even ask you if you want to create a translation for it. You can do that, and then away it goes. So that's another one of the key functionalities that you can play with as well. The other trick with WQX is it allows you to be able to submit data as well. I'm not going to go through that whole process because you guys are going to do that too, and just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through that. But you can come to this import monitoring locations, for example, and what you do is you choose your import configuration, and then you upload a file that matches that import configuration, and you just say submit, and away it goes. It's going to go through a whole series of error checking, and once it gets through that error checking, if it's good, it'll say, do you want to send it to WQX? And if you say yes, then it's published to WQX Web. And then the next time the portal refreshes, which typically is about a week, if not 2 weeks, that data will show up in the portal. So it's a really easy way to get your data published. Anything I missed?
No, nailed it.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have about 55 minutes. This is going to be about learning about the data template, learning about WQX Web, and at the end, you guys are actually going to be submitting files yourself using the training accounts, okay? So 55 minutes, here we go. The first thing I wanted to talk a little bit, expand a little bit more on, actually, before we do that, and it's something I was thinking about, is we talk about WQX Web and WQX Web made for Excel or flat files, right? But I also want you guys to be thinking about WQX Web in another way. So we now have these web API submission services. So from your database, you can submit data directly to WQX. And so what does that mean, and how is that powerful? So when you guys are creating, in your node, you guys are creating staging tables. You're creating a staging table that looks like literally WQX Web format. It looks like the templates in many cases. And then you're generating XML on that, and then it's creating an XML file and submitting it. Well, what you can do is instead submit the file of your choice in the format of your choice, because the import configurations have a lot of flexibility. and then utilize the web service to hit the import configuration to do those translations for you. So those things you're doing on your table, such as the changing the DO to dissolved oxygen, or the format changes, right? So if you have a column that's dissolved oxygen, you don't have to make that a horizontal format. You could submit it as is, and like a node submission using these web API services. So this is something that's really new. There's actually going to be a poster on it at the poster viewing session, so I encourage you guys to check that out. We're not going to dive into that. However, what I want you to think about is if you do have a node submission, and I always think it's very powerful because maintaining staging tables can be hard because, like the nutrient best practices, speciations required on nutrients now come WQX 3.0. Well, then you have to change your database to adjust that staging table. Well, technically, you could just throw it in your import configuration and say, when you see nitrogen, add as n, because I always know it's as n. And so you're not changing your source data system. So I just want you to kind of think about that for those more advanced node users. Let's jump over to the import configuration. So let me display this, make sure it's correct. Sorry, I want to make sure it's correct for the webinar. Okay, so import configurations. Dwayne talked about this. So the column headers and how they relate to what the original data set is. So column A is monitoring location ID, and you can see there at the bottom, it's down here in the spreadsheet as well. And then you can see here that you're giving some format information, so true, false, what it's looking for in the system. However, what you saw here on the left are these buttons, which I really love. These are, what these mean is this means delete. So this means you could just get rid of that row completely in your column. There's another one under an advanced user, it's called copy. And what's really fortunate about that is when you have situations like that DO, and you have add all those elements to that one column, you can copy that and just change it to temperature in the correct degrees, right? So you're not building the import configuration over and over. This is add element, you'll use this later. And change element, so that would just be switching it from one element to something else. So you're going to be using the delete one during the training and the add element specifically, and you can do the switch order, but I don't think you'll be doing that. And then over on the left was the translations. This is there on the previous one. You see there's no translations here, but that's where you would do when you see DO, convert it to dissolved oxygen, okay? Let's just jump into the WQX template, so that's really what this next part is about. This is an example of the WQX template. You can get this off our website. Did you guys get the email from me prior to the training and you downloaded all the stuff I asked you to? In that email, in that zip file, there's a file called WQX Web Training, XLSX. And this is what that looks like. This file, this first section is not filled out in yours, but you're going to be doing that in the training. But this is essentially the template. There's instructions and definitions in the template, but just as Dwayne described, they're broken out into three pieces: projects, monitoring locations, and results. And just because it's broken out this way, like he said, you can do cross-tab import configurations and stuff like this, but we're going to start with the simple part. The first one is, in yours, it's going to be empty. And so during the exercise, you're going to fill this out and you're going to submit that. But what I'm going to do is literally jump in to CDX and show you how we're going to do that. So I'm going to log into one of the training passwords. Make sure I did that right. So when you log in, you're going to be using a training account, and this is what that's going to look like. It looks just slightly different from Dwayne's earlier. You're going to select the role, which is WQX Web. And then it looks very similar. You don't have the administrator right, which he had earlier, but that's normal because it's a training account. And you'll have, under setup, just like he did, you'll have import configurations. And there's a setting training ones here right at the top, a training results, projects, and monitoring locations. You'll be utilizing this. I'm going to open up this training projects. As you can see, there are 3 elements here in this training projects. Whereas in this is, just for example, this is your projects here at your state or your region or tribe or organization, anything. So these are the 3 that it's expecting, but I have 4 more. So I'm wanting to send to WQX that my QAPP is approved, the agency, the document, and the document type. So how do I add that to an import configuration? So what you want to do is you want to go in. So I said this was delete, this was add new, and this was change the elements. So we want to add another one. Okay, so I need to add the QAPP approval agency, the indicator, the attachment, and file name and type. These, okay, so this is the difference. You can map them all to a single element to one column. You don't want to do that, so make sure you don't select that, and you hit OK. So that hit all four of those that needed to be added right here. Okay, so that's simply how you add new items to an import configuration. And now you can see that project attachment type and name are in columns D and E. But as you saw, I'll show you a neat trick. Down here, create a list of column headings that I can copy and paste into Excel. If you click that, what's going to happen, it's just a list of these headers, or these elements. So I just Control-C, copy that. And what I like to do is just paste it above so that I can say exactly how they line up. So right now, WQX Web is expecting my project attachment type to be here, but that's not true, right? So what I need it to do, attachment type, file name, okay, so I need this QAPP approved indicator to be in column D, because that's where my data set is. I need that document type to be, or the agency name to be in column E. So I need to switch those around. So once we go back into CDX, this one goes to D, and then it just shifts everything else down, okay? And then this one goes to E. And so now it should be, nope, this file name's inverted too. Yep, so this should be yes. So all you're doing, this is exactly what you would be doing if you went in with your own data set. You'd say, what does my data set look like? What does WQX need? How do I alter it to be the same? The approved indicator is just a yes, no. And you can see my EPA approved says a Y. It needs to be yes, because that's what it's expecting. And so now I know that these match, so I delete that out. And so this matches perfectly to this import configuration, columns A through G. So you can see here, columns A through G match. So now you can hit save, and it's expecting the first worksheet right here. Do you see that? It's expecting a Microsoft XLSX, and it's expecting the first worksheet. However, if you look at your workbook in Excel, it's the third one. Projects is the third. So that's something you want to check for when you're submitting that information. You want to say, okay, let's switch this to third, and then hit save. And so now, what I can do, now that this file is ready to go, it's my data set, I can go to Import and Submit, Import Projects. I'm going to use the training projects. It's submitting the third worksheet. It's new data only. And there's two buttons here. The two radio. Okay, so let's go through this. So the first one's the import configuration in which you selected. The second's the file type. So even if you had an import configuration that defaulted to Excel, XLS, you can change that on the import. For some reason or another, you have something different. You can also change the worksheet. I changed the import configuration in general just because I know it's always going to be the third one. This says ignore the first row of the import file. We say yes, because what WQX is relying on is not the header names, but rather the columns, because we indicated the columns. So we don't want it to think that project ID is data. We don't want it to insert that as a line in the data set. So we say ignore that file. It's submitting to an organization ID, so when you go to submit, you'll have your own org ID. It might be Arizona DEQ, something like that. It'll be just like your Attained one. It's actually the same. And so you'll have your own org ID, and then new data only, existing data only, or contain new and existing data. So these are really what the system's allowing you to do. So for example, it's going to check data against what's already under this organization and say, have you submitted this record before? And if it sees that it's a duplicate, it won't let you submit it because you said this is new data only, right? So you want to make sure you're being careful. It's just a really good way to make sure you're not submitting duplicate information. So I'm going to say it may contain newer existing in case somebody has submitted this before. And then let me review my data set in the staging area before submitting or automatically submit data to WQX. So what this does is WQX is running checks against the data for rules. That's why you're indicating what's in each column. So for example, I told you that the QAPP indicator was Y, but it was expecting a yes. So what the system would have done, it would have given me an error and say Y is not a valid value for QAPP indicator. So these are the things you're navigating when you're submitting that information. So if you were submitting automatically to WQX, it would fail because it wouldn't have checked for the rules first. It was tried to send the rules, and then it would find that they were being broken and it wouldn't submit. Does that make sense, what it's doing, the staging area versus the straight to the system? Okay. All right, well, let's take a look. So I'm going to import that file, and it's actually in here. This is different from where yours is, so. And then this attachments file. So I showed you here in this Excel template that I'm attaching a document, this QAPP_example.pdf, and where you attach that information is right here under the attachments file. So I attached that. In your data set that you also downloaded, that WQX training, there's a QAPP example PDF. You just hit open, and then you go ahead and hit import data. Valid attachment. Oh, it needs to be zipped up. So WQX is pretty good about telling you what's wrong. I think you can't just attach this as is. Zip that. Because in that file of projects, you could have multiple references to documents, and so you'll have a zip file in which has them all. Okay. And then I'm going to navigate and grab that file again, and then hit import. And then it's going to check against all those rules. If it's not mad at me today, it'll show me a green check mark over here on the right. Limited data set to be processed. Okay, so this just means somebody else is submitting data at the same time. So this says data is ready to be submitted to CDX. This is a yellow box, but this says I have no errors. So what you can see here, if you view this log, this is the processing log. All it says is these are just basic messages. It's saying this is okay, good job, go ahead and submit, right? So you can go ahead and just push press, and at this point it's just sitting on this interface. If you want it to be published to the portal, you have to take one more step, and you want to hit export submit to CDX, okay? It's just saying who is submitting this. It's me. It'll come up with your usual profile stuff, usually. Right now it's the training account. And, okay. And then it's processing, and then it'll let me know that it was successful. Upon successful submission, if you're using your own profile, it'll set you an email and say that you had a successful submission to WQX. So this is a simple example. Projects are pretty simple because there's not many elements in it. The difficulty to error resolution comes when you're getting an error on DO and you're getting an error and that says 0.36 is not a valid unit. Well, that's because your columns are mixed up, right? So it's expecting the results in the unit, and then it's going to give you a bunch of errors. So sometimes you'll get a lot. And people will say, I have 10,000 errors. And I'll say, oh, really? That's not a lot, because it's probably just the same error over and over at every single row in your file. So if you're submitting 10,000 rows, it could be one error per row. So that's the projects, and that's what you guys are going to go through. The next one you're going to do is going to be the monitoring locations. The monitoring locations one is going to need a little bit of work as well. And I'm going to show you, I'm not going to do this one for you. This is where the hands-on stuff's going to come into play. So what you're going to do in your exercise is you're going to do the exact same thing I just did in projects, okay? So you'll have to do it because the way WQX works is projects is a unique ID, monitoring locations is a unique ID, and then your results reference both of them. So they both have to exist in the system before your results can be submitted, okay? So you're going to have to go through and load projects yourself. Then monitoring locations, I'll have the list of all the things that need to be fixed in the monitoring locations, and then you guys will use those 4 buttons I taught you about to make the edits to the import configuration and once again submit the file, and then the results will be the last thing, okay? For those of you on the line, I'm sorry, this is the point where we're going to have to part ways. So you guys, we're going to be coming back at 3:30 to talk about the water quality portal. If you guys ever, we're going to be using, there's too many people on the webinar to give training accounts to, so we can have you guys use them at another time if you want to request them from the WQX help desk, and then you can do the same exercise on your own another day. Do you have anything else to say to the webinar participants?
We'll be back at 3:30 Mountain Time.
Mountain Time. Yes, that's a very good distinction. Okay, for those on the line, thank you for joining us. Join us back in about an hour. Thank you.